lucky today to have this panel, and it's my honor to introduce in a little bit Professor Chikara, who we are so lucky to have at Seton Hall University. She's going to introduce our panelists and the folks who are speaking today, but Professor Chikara works in the department as a public relations professor, and as you know, we just got international certification in the public relations program. It's because the philosophy in that program, the public relations and journalism program, is giving people opportunities to learn through experience, right? And we all agree in this program, the three of us, Dr. Nyberg, Dr. Heim, that you learn by doing, and that's what really sticks. And so for all the work that you folks did in putting this together, for promoting it, for making sure the press know, for talking to folks, to getting everyone prepared, and what you're going to do after, know that this is experiences that are going to stick. These are the things that I promise you. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the program and the panel to your professor and our colleague, Professor Chikara. We have a little gift for her. But
thank you, everyone. I just want to quickly introduce everybody so Professor De Palma can get on his way. Today is the second in a series of culminating activities which I am convinced hold great value for our students. For it brings to this community ideas of importance from the real world. In this case, the ponderous and pressing issue of immigration. I wish you a stimulating 90-minute discussion and debate. As university representatives, it's important that we now focus on the seminal ideas of our panel of experts. And to my mother, thank you for impressing on me the concept of globalization. She is a woman of vision, and she has influenced me greatly. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. So without further ado, enjoy the program, and I now present to you our beloved moderator and writer-in-residence, Professor Anthony De Palma. Thank you for your patience.
These are not for me, so thank you. Thank you all for coming. There must be some sort of a generational difference here because, you see, I use paper, and I never have to worry about whether it's in or not. So thank you all. Thank you, panel. Thank you, students, and a guest for coming. Just yesterday, President Obama prodded congressional negotiators to come to an agreement on a plan to overhaul the nation's immigration laws, saying that despite many delays, and you might remember that this was a promise he made for his first term and never got around to doing it, many delays and disputes, he still wants a bill to emerge soon and for debate in the Senate to begin as early as next month, which of course is next week, right after Easter. He was speaking at a naturalization ceremony at the White House yesterday, the very heart of what it means to be a citizen and an immigrant. The president said that everyone pretty much knows what's broken and everybody knows how to fix it. What's left, he said, is for everyone involved to work up the political courage to do what is required. The president's remarks were basically directed at all of us, but most specifically at a bipartisan group of senators, known as the Group of 8, that have been working on a plan for immigration reform for the last 3 months. They hope to have it out before Easter, but as these things go, it's not ready yet. They went on spring break and have not released anything yet. Republican opposition to immigration reform seems, at least in the last couple of weeks, to have been weakening, with Senator Rand Paul now calling publicly for conservatives to embrace immigration reform. He recently outlined a proposal that would grant some form of legal status to the estimated 11 million illegal immigrants after the federal government has certified first that the border is secure. The group of 8 senators remain deadlocked over several issues, including the details of a guest worker program and how the legislation will implement and define security at the border. One of the key representatives, Representative Luis Gutierrez of Chicago, made the point that there are 1,400 people being deported every day in the United States. And that highlights the need for reform, noting that even if Congress were to move at what he called lightning speed, which is not the way Congress usually moves, it's more like glacial speed, and the president were to sign a bill in July, by that point, more than 150,000 additional people would have been deported. So time is of the essence. The goal in a session like this is to provide you, all of you, with what's called actionable information. The ideas, the concepts, the arguments that you need to have so that you, as citizens, can play a part in shaping the important debate. Calling your representatives and saying, I think you ought to do this, or you ought not to do this. To help you with that, to give you that actionable information, we have a terrific panel with us today that will guide us through the national immigration debate and outline the impact such efforts would have on the nation and here in New Jersey. The format for today is that we'll begin with a panel discussion among the experts and then open it up to questions from you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the panel. Starting all the way at the left is Michael Patrick Carroll, a Republican member of the New Jersey Assembly representing the 25th District, which covers part of Morris County. Assemblyman Carroll was first elected to the Assembly in 1996 and has been re-elected every term since then. He currently serves as parliamentarian in the lower house and is sponsor of several bills, including A 1490, that would end affirmative action practices in the state. Next is Eric Blinderman, International Litigation Counsel for Proskauer Rose, an international law firm based in New York. He handles matters before the International Criminal Court and other ad hoc tribunals and represents sovereign bodies sovereign states before the International Court of Justice and other international bodies. From March of 2004 until December of 2004, Blinderman served as an Associate General Counsel of the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. Later served as Chief Legal Counsel and Associate Deputy to the Regime Crimes Liaison Office, and did substantial work in facilitating Iraqi immigration to the United States and out of that troubled area. He also somehow manages to own and run 2 restaurants in New York City.
Guess you all go. We're not big bills.
Nice. Next is David Kallick, who joined the Fiscal Policy Institute as a senior fellow in July of 2001. Previously, he was a senior fellow at the Preamble Center, and before that, editor of Social Policy magazine. Since 2007, importantly, he has led the Fiscal Policy Institute's Immigration Research Initiative and is principal author of several major reports on the role of immigrants in the economy, and will share with us this morning some of his most recent findings. And then closest to me is Chris Bollwage, a lifelong resident of Elizabeth who is serving now as 5th term as mayor of 5th? 6th? Oh, you have to update your.
But who's counting?
Mayor recently completed a term as president of the New Jersey State League of Municipalities. Mayor Bollwage's administration has worked to revitalize Elizabeth, and anybody who's been down there recently knows what success they've had doing that, and attracting people back to the city, the 4th largest in New Jersey and one of the oldest. Since 1990, Elizabeth's population has grown 10%. Many of those newcomers are immigrants. So I'd like to begin the discussion noting that although there's no formal immigration legislative proposal right now. Group of 8 has been meeting, but there's no bill that we can look at right now, although we have some sense of what's in there. I know that Assemblyman Carroll has done some work on the Group of 8's proposals from the Republican standpoint, and I wanted to begin by asking him to bring us up to date on what the most current ideas are and what we can expect to see if a bill is introduced after the Easter break.
Thank you, Professor. One of the things you learn in the serving as a legislature is the devil is always in the details. It's very easy to make a press release and say, this is what we ought to do, as the president, in fact, did yesterday. He says, we know what we should do. It's the how that turns out to be the problem. The Group of 8, as they're called, is an interesting group. I think you call maybe even the Group of 9 now that Rand Paul has gotten on board. They have proposed basically 4 pillars for legislative action, and they are as follows. Create a tough but fair path to citizenship for unauthorized immigrants currently living in the United States that is contingent upon securing our borders and tracking whether legal immigrants have left the country when required. 2, reform our legal immigration system to better recognize the importance of characteristics that will help build the American economy and strengthen American families. 3, create an effective employment verification system that will prevent identity theft and end the hiring of future unauthorized workers. And lastly, 4, establish an improved process for admitting future workers to serve our nation's workforce needs while simultaneously protecting all workers. Now, it would be very difficult, I think, for any of us on this panel to disagree with any of those provisions. But for example, I think we might find a difference between those who believe that the law ought to be tough on the one hand and fair on the other. What's the definition of fair? What's the definition of tough? For example, they talk about at times they're going to pay a fine, pay a penalty, go to the end of the line, pay back taxes. How do you assess those things? What defines when the border is secure? So as we proceed through this discussion, it seems to me that the first and foremost is we got the principles down, and as the President says, pretty much everybody agrees on some element of those principles or all of them. It's how to affect them in the form of legislation that becomes the issue.
So the agreement is that the system is broken. How do we fix it? Lots of different ways, and no agreement yet. And there'll be all kinds of considerations. Political ones, certainly.
Something as simple, for example, the biggest immigration driver in this country is what we call family reunification plans. I think in '65, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, and perhaps you would, in 1965 they set aside 70% of the slots for family reunification. Most immigration in this country is for family reunification purposes. We do not, unlike, as I understand, Mexico, Canada, and a lot of other countries, have a specific system for admitting what we might call high-value immigrants, doctors, lawyers, engineers, things like that. That's part of the issue that's going to arise as to whether we focus more on physicians or people who've been trained in this country at our schools under student visas who want to stay, or do we continue family reunification processes or other similar systems?
Yeah. Having lived and worked in Canada for a number of years, I can tell you that the way their system works is you basically buy that privilege.
Mexico apparently is the same.
They require you to have a certain amount of money to invest in the country, and then you can move to the top of the line. And so economics, the fiscal aspect of immigration reform becomes very important, especially at a time like this when we're coming out of a recession and there's still high unemployment. So I wanted to ask Mr. Kallick to talk about the kind of impact that potentially making 11 million illegal immigrants citizens and giving them all of the benefits and changing the immigration laws would have on the nation and then maybe specifically on New Jersey.
Sure. So I think it's I think it's important to understand that the immigration principles, I mean, I guess, of course, we'll see exactly how they get carried out, but I don't think immigration reform necessarily means more immigrants. I think, especially at a time like today when there's an economic downturn or the very, very slow recovery still, I think you would want immigration to go up and down in relation to the U.S. economy, and that is actually what happens kind of through market forces. We see immigration lower. I think that's what you would want to have happen with some degree of greater control at the federal level if we fix the immigration system. So I think that, why would there be an impact on the economy? These are people who are already here. If you're not going to see more immigration and probably not see less either, or not significantly less. And I think that I would say there are three big things. One is that immigrants, so undocumented immigrants would presumably get legal status somehow. So that will free them to move from job to job more easily. Will obviously allow them to, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but what we saw after 1986 is that people invest in their own education, establish themselves a little bit more fully, so they rise. So it's good for them, but that, of course, is also good for their economy because they're more productive, they're able to be at the jobs. I think having a level playing field, so businesses are competing against each other on a fair basis, is a big advantage to the economy. And then the fiscal question is I think, a little more complicated. Maybe I'll just say that we can get into it more deeply if you want, but my sense of it is that would be more or less of a wash. That at the moment you have, but it would be a wash in terms of the treasury. In other words, like how much money do we get and how much. I think it would be a positive thing in the sense that it would line up more properly the way that people are paying things according to what they should be paying, and also getting the benefits that they should be getting them. So right now, just to give a quick example, about half of undocumented immigrants are estimated to pay Social Security taxes. We know that because the Social Security Administration has what they call a suspense file, which is unmatched Social Security numbers to money that's getting paid, and that's big, $10 billion a year or so. So that's not good for, that's in some ways good for the Treasury, this money that's going in, but it's not really a system that's functioning properly. Only half of the immigrants are paying, undocumented immigrants, and nobody basically is getting those benefits. And so I think that what you would end up with is sort of a, lining up of things.
Perhaps what might be of great concern for young people who will be graduating in a couple of years is the impact that it would have on jobs. I mean, we often hear that immigrants are taking the jobs that Americans don't want, but if the immigration reform is going to include some high-skilled people and changing things that way, what impact is it likely to have on the job market in 3 or 4 years when these guys are out there looking for a job?
So, you do sometimes hear this idea that immigrants are taking jobs that U.S.-born people don't want, and you sometimes also hear that they're taking jobs they do want. And I don't think either one of those is exactly right, actually. I think you see immigrants pretty much more spread throughout the economy than I think is widely recognized. So, there are genuine concerns about day laborers or, there's people in construction in a general way. But I think that, that's actually a tiny fraction of overall immigration, which has been, which has grown in response to economic growth and has also fueled further economic growth. So I think that's, that's sort of what's been going on over the last 30 years. I think that what you see going forward is hopefully one of the principles that's alluded to there is basically referencing an agreement between the American Federation of Labor, the labor unions together, and the Chamber of Commerce, right? That's talking about the idea that you want to have a labor market that's responsive to where there's true demand. And I think, if you could do that, and that is one of the details that I would say is far from agreed upon at this point, exactly how that's going to work. But the idea would be that you only have immigrants coming into specific job categories when there's a true demand here. And I think, actually, I think the disagreement is between employers who think they'd always like to have more workers, and that, of course, gives them a bigger pool of people to choose from at potentially lower wages, versus the employees who, to some extent, or unions, to some extent, are always going to want fewer workers. Although, in both cases, I think there's some attention to how do you make sure that you allow for growth. You don't want to have such a tight constraint that you're pushing up wages but not allowing for businesses to grow.
The debate is taking place all over the country. The vote will take place in Washington. But perhaps the people who are closest to the real impact of immigration are those in the cities, where many poorer immigrants who lack that kind of specialized technical skills get their start. People like my grandfather and perhaps the grandparents or great-grandparents of you. That's a role that cities like Elizabeth have been fulfilling for generations. Mayor Bollwage, I'd like to ask you, in what ways the situation involving the immigrant community in 2013 is different from an immigration debate that we might have had in 1913, and how, in your opinion, that ought to shape the debate over immigration reform in Washington. Is this the same old story?
Well, I know I'm old, but I wasn't here in 1913. So let me say that we are all immigrants. I mean, and this bit of immigration reform is an extremely interesting topic from a mayor who represents a lot of different ethnic groups. My grandparents' parents came here in the 1800s from Ireland during the potato famine. And I don't know whether they came here legally or illegally, but they got here. My father's ancestry came here in the early 1800s. I always teased my father when he was alive that I think there were Hessians left over from the Revolutionary War. So if they were, they didn't come here legally either. So we have been a land of opportunity for 200 plus years. And we need to continue to be that land of opportunity because the immigrant community has built our country. And so I'm a mayor. I'm not a bureaucrat or a legislator sitting in Washington trying to figure out a solution that they're going to document on paper and then pass it down to people like me. So I find this debate going on extremely interesting because in the debate in 1913, we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have Facebook and Twitter, and we didn't have Instagram or anything like that. So, and the immigrants were coming from Europe. And now all of a sudden that the immigration has changed and it's come from Latin America or Mexico or elsewhere, it's become much more catastrophic for our country. And I find that an interesting dynamic for whatever reasons. But the city of Elizabeth is made up of 60% Hispanics from all different communities, South America, Mexico, and everywhere else. And the immigration of the early 1900s and the immigration of 2013, the city of Elizabeth would have never prospered over the last 50 years if it was not for immigration. In the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, the Cuban immigration came into the city of Elizabeth and did wonders with our Elizabeth Avenue, our shopping district, our stores, little bodegas, and they revitalized this section of our community. And as the Cuban community grew and into second and third generations, they have moved out. If you look at the numbers, the Cuban immigration is probably 5th or 6th on our list. Fast forwarding to 2013, in the last 10 years, our immigration has occurred from South America. The Colombian community has done a yeoman's task of reinvigorating an area on Morris Avenue near the train station. Same thing. They have done it with stores and bodegas. But now they're involved, as the Cuban community was, in law. They're involved in religious activities. They're involved in the economics. They're involved in the education community. So as a kid who grew up in Elizabeth, born in 1954, and have watched Elizabeth change over the last 50-some-odd years, and people say to me, you know, it ain't like it used to be. You ever hear that? Your parents will say that. You know, it ain't like it used to. Well, it's better. It's not like it used to be. It's never going to be like it used to be because that's what we're all about. It's better. The growth of our communities, the growth of our cities depends on economic development and jobs. And what better way to have it than have new people coming in, taking over those jobs, and then pushing other people into better jobs. That's what happened in the 1990s. We saw African Americans leave the cities in the 1990s because of the economic tide and the rising of the middle class. And people moved to other communities. And that left a void in urban communities. And it was filled by immigration from South America and other areas. And it's been filled to a great testament that has helped our communities. I think this debate is extremely interesting because there's always a focus on, we got to do something to these people. You love that line, right? We got to do something to these people who came here wrongly. Well, these people are coming here looking for a better way, a better life. And what really bothers me is when our government rips people out of their homes and takes a father or a kid and deports them with no notice to the rest of the family. That's not the America that I grew up in. And that's not the America that I think we should be there in the future. It's happened in Iowa, it's happened in the Midwest, and what happens in those areas, they seek refuge in a church, it's wrong.
Mayor, do you know what percentage of the immigrants in Elizabeth have documents and what don't?
I can tell you that we have 127,000 people documented in the city of Elizabeth according to the 2010 census. You know, give or take a couple of hundred people. I can tell you our city has probably got 140 to 145,000 people on a daily basis. But during the day, we are the county seat. I would imagine we probably have upwards of 180 to 200,000 people in the city during the course of the day.
But do most of the immigrants have legal papers, or?
Well, I met with the day workers. You know, the day workers gather on a place on Elizabeth Avenue, and there's 20 or 30 of them. And I met with the day workers. I met with their advocates. I met with their lawyers, because what they'll do the day, and they're mostly men, is when attractive women walk by, they will catcall on the women and they will say things. And I've said to these guys that if you don't want to get arrested, you can't make sexual innuendo at the women who walk by the street. It's just not going to work, because shopkeepers and others are going to call the police on you, and the first thing that's going to happen to you guys is you're going to get picked up, you're going to go to jail, and if you're not here legally, you're going to be deported. So rule number one is no catcalling on the women if you want to get picked up for a day job. The other problem is a police officer went there one day because the shopkeepers complained. They arrested 5 people. 3 of them wound up in a holding area in the city of Elizabeth where we have a detention center for illegal immigration. And I think 1 eventually wound up getting deported. So what did the rest of the Hispanic community do? They called Channel 41 and 47 and said the mayor's a racist and he's ordering Hispanic people being picked up on the corner who are just looking for a day job. Well, I had nothing to do with it, but I'm still the mayor. So I've said to the group of Hispanic businesses that if you want these day laborers moved, then you're going to have to stand up on Channel 41 and 47 and say, we're asking for these people to move. Because the mayor's not going to do it anymore. The mayor didn't do it the last time, the mayor's not going to do it this time. And Morristown, what they did there, the previous mayor, I don't know if you read about that, that was a few years back, that was pretty nuts.
I can tell you that in New Jersey, it's about a quarter, according to the Pew Hispanic Center, of about a quarter of immigrants are undocumented, and it's probably, I'm sure it's not the majority.
Just one final story. There was a town in Pennsylvania who the mayor decided that illegal immigrants can't live here. They passed an ordinance that if you're illegal, you have to leave the community. Okay, that was the ordinance. And then the police cracked down on all the illegal immigrants. Well, guess what happened? They left. But guess what happened to all the people who were citizens that owned shops there? They closed them because they were no longer making any money. So is that a smart rationale?
What happened to the mayor? I think he lost the next election.
And he lost the next election, yeah. Because not only did he drive out the people who shopped in all of the stores and were paying their taxes, he drove out the people who voted for him. Not real bright.
Well, the situation in Elizabeth, where the majority of the immigrants are from Latin America, is reflected in the nationwide figures for immigration. An overwhelming majority of the 11 million illegal immigrants in the country today are Latinos, most of them from Mexico. That overshadows the reality that the U.S. is still attracting immigrants from all over the world. Mr. Blinderman, what can we learn from your unique experience with immigration from Iraq that can help inform the debate that is about to get underway in Washington?
Sure. I think I come at this issue from rather different perspective than maybe most of the other people here, simply because what I generally handle are people who are currently outside of the United States, so they're not actually immigrants here, but they served as either drivers, translators, logisticians. They worked with our U.S. military, they worked with our State Department, they worked with our civilian contractors, and they were on the front lines with us in Iraq, and they're currently on the front lines with our troops in Afghanistan. And so these are people who are placed under serious risk, both not only for their work on behalf of the U.S. government, but we've pulled out now of Iraq and are winding down our efforts in Afghanistan. And so once you've begun work supporting the U.S. military in any part of the world, but particularly the Middle East, you have a target on your back. Insurgents are looking to hunt you down and kill you. So I'm dealing from the issue where I will get a text message off in the middle of the night and it will say, "Dear Mr. Eric, I'm hiding in my house in Basra. I just woke up today with blood smeared on my door saying, 'Death to the traitor, help.'" I believe, as a matter of U.S. policy, lost in this sort of debate, is the special moral obligation that we owe to those that stood with us during our last 2 conflicts, and those people are at very serious risk. So when I hear about sort of the 4 pillars of immigration reform, I recognize that there are a large group of people out there, probably numbering in the hundreds of thousands, because it's not just the individuals who work with us, it's their families and friends who often get kidnapped and killed as well, who are left by the wayside and are left expecting assistance from the United States. And so much of the bureaucracy and legislation that we do need to translate, and I agree, the devil is in the details, is put together in such a Byzantine way that it actually results in real harm to people. So I'll give you an example. I founded an NGO as part of my legal work at Proskauer called the List Project to Resettle Iraqi Allies. Originally limited to Iraq, but we're still doing a lot of Afghani work. And as a result of our work, we were able to successfully pass legislation in Congress, which was signed by the president, sponsored by Senator Ted Kennedy before he passed away, which created an avenue, a legal avenue for people to come to the United States who had served with our military either as refugees or through the issuance of special immigration visas. Now, there's a separate track of people that come that's different from those who served with our military, and that separate track are for people who've been displaced from Iraq, who register with the UNHCR and have had no work whatsoever with the U.S. military. There was an incident in Kentucky in 2007, and by the way, so the legislation was passed. The system was broken, but at least it created a mechanism by when I would get a text message in the middle of the night, we could shuttle people through safe houses throughout Iraq, maybe get them out through Jordan, and ultimately resettle them to the United States. By the way, the person who I've just described who sent me that text message was a dentist who served with the U.S. military when we originally came in and actually resettled here in New Jersey. We got him out, and he's now just completing his dental degree. I want to say it's probably not at Seton Hall, it might be at Rutgers, but and is now progressing up that ladder. But in 2009 or 2008, there was an incident in Kentucky where 2 refugees from Iraq who had not served with our military, who came in through a separate track, were picked up for plotting a terrorist attack. Now, as someone who worked for the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and a federal prosecutor, I was responsible for being the deputy in charge of our efforts to hold Saddam Hussein accountable and others responsible for committing gross atrocities. I am very much aware of the security risks that attach for permitting anyone, whether they're from Latin America, whether they're from Europe, whether they're from Asia, whether they're from the Middle East, to ensure that public safety is protected. There was a break in the system with respect to this incident in Kentucky, and so the political reaction to this was to institute a series of background checks which were lacking all basis in reality for those that we needed to assist most imminently. And the system completely stopped. Nobody from the Middle East, if you had a Muslim or Arabic, first or last name, was permitted, regardless if you had served or lived on a forward operating base with our military troops for years, carried weapons with our troops. It had completely dried up. I mean, it had dried up to the point where I had a client, a whole family was being held up because a 3-year-old male, the way the security checks work in part are through the institution of computer algorithms because there's no traditional spelling between an Arabic and an English name, were not capable of coming to the United States despite serious death threats to them because of an incident that occurred in Kentucky to a subset of the population that didn't apply to them and then resulted in a 3-year-old male, who I guarantee you was not an insurgent and 3 years old, and his family, who had served on the front lines with our troops. And in fact, the individual, the principal applicant in question, had actually received numerous awards from the Department of Defense. And ultimately, his older son wound up being shot through the shoulder while he was waiting by insurgents who picked him up at a soccer game. That can't be right. That can't be the way the words we put on paper were meant to operate. And so I think, from my perspective, how one rationally balances those competing policy considerations are very difficult choices that people in the legislature, and ultimately the legislature in coordination with our executive branch, who not only have to sign the law but then implement, have to take into account. And how one balances those considerations is a very difficult task. But there are real-world consequences for this.
3 years old. Yep. All right, so we will open it up to questions. And while they're getting ready, I just wanted to ask Assemblyman Carroll if he thinks that the Republicans would hold the same view of immigration and its effect as the mayor, where he talked about pushing people into other opportunity, whereas I think some people may see the immigrants sort of pushing them out of where they lived before.
As respects either political party, have you ever heard the expression that it's like herding cats? I mean, I think the mayor will agree that the Democrats are no more unified on this than the Republicans are. You'll find the Rand Pauls of this world will have one position, and let's say the McCains might have a different, and that's just the way it is. And I've often said that we conservatives are never happy unless we're beating up on each other. It always seems to us that the old joke was that the Democrats fight like crazy during the spring, but they come together like cats during the spring, but they come together to have kittens in the fall. We don't. I mean, and so the answer to the question is there's no one Republican position on that. But I would also like to say, as respect counsel, the fact of the matter is if you've ever dealt with the government bureaucracy before, and I know all of you have, you always find, for example, you find these school kids are getting suspended for eating Pop-Tarts and turning them into guns. Bureaucrats will do that. That's just the way they are. They'll read something on a piece of paper and say, well, it fits into this box. And I've suggested a piece of legislation that should go to the bureaucracy. And it says after a piece of legislation or after a whole bunch of bureaucratic rules, there ought to be a sentence that says, notwithstanding any of the foregoing, don't do it if it's stupid. But unfortunately, oftentimes that's what government specializes in. So the answer to the question is, will the Republicans come before they go on a particular issue and get together and who knows?
Who knows?
It's just not possible to come to that conclusion, let alone in the United States Senate.
All right, so now we'll have questions. Just begin by introducing yourself, give us your name, and then ask the brief question.
First, I'd like to thank you all for coming. My name is Carroll Richardson. I'm a diplomacy major here at the Whitehead School, and I'm a junior. I have two questions. I don't know if I can ask both, but my first one.
You can limit it to one.
Okay. My first question my question would be directed to Mr. Blinderman. It's really, you made a statement making this more of a moral issue rather than a sustainable development issue. And I know that when we going into World War II, we had a plan. We planned for 2 years in advance before going in on how much we were going to spend on rebuilding and coming up with basically, I think it is the Marshall Plan on rebuilding afterwards. And we didn't do that with Iraq. And by not doing that with Iraq, we kind of have a state responsibility to rebuild, and the people there need to remain there. It's not really an immigration issue. They need to remain there because they're going to increase the rule of law, would they not? So I just think that switching the argument to more of like, how do we get these people to invest in their own country and want to build that up to make it a more secure and safe international world.
Is that your question?
Yeah, so I would say that, or ask, how would we implement that rather than immigration?
No, I think your point has a lot of validity, of course. And there's a whole host of issues that tie into that. And obviously the purpose of this discussion today isn't really to talk about sort of, the planning or lack thereof with respect to the decision that goes on in terms of whether it was right or wrong to go into Iraq or Afghanistan or elsewhere. The point that I am simply trying to make, and the work that the LIST project does, is devoted towards a very limited subset of the Iraqi population that worked with the United States and have no other options. If they remain, they will die, period. We worked with them, making sure that their safety and other aspects of their well-being were taken care of during the time that we were in Iraq. Having left, that responsibility still attaches, but it's not devoted towards removing the 25 million people that are in Iraq. It's only for those that I believe we share a special responsibility for.
Okay. Of course, the doctor in Pakistan who helped us capture and kill bin Laden is in jail, and we haven't been able to do anything. Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew. I'm a dual grad student here with the Whitehead School and the College of Arts and Sciences as well. I had one question. I sort of had two parts, but the first question was this. When you talked earlier about the 4 pillars that are really structuring this new immigration plan, when I was reading about it, it seems there's different caveats or sort of loopholes there. We're talking about treating immigrants with PhDs different, immigrants that work in the agricultural section different, and then, you know, dreamers or kids of immigrants who had no say in it differently. Isn't that creating two stratuses or two different classes of immigrants, one that are going to be pushed ahead at the front of the line and those that aren't? And if that's the case, what's the incentive for those that aren't to go ahead and pay that fine and then get to the back of the line? Because aren't they being mistreated right there? And also, just really quick secondary, I think a lot of people would agree that the last great Republican president that we really had was Reagan, and his approach to the immigration issue was just to do a straight amnesty. So why is that a good idea then and a bad idea now? Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, the plans that you're talking about Washington are not 2 or 3-pronged; they're multi-pronged. And and again, I think treating everybody the same with respect to their, I think as the moderator mentioned, candidate you can buy in. That's not such a bad idea, because if you're coming in and you've got a great skill and you can buy a spot, okay, great. You're not going to be a burden to your fellow taxpayers. I think that fundamentally is what a lot of conservatives that look at when they look at immigration. They say, will this benefit the country as a whole? Now, for example, I'm not entirely persuaded that a huge number of low-skilled laborers in this country is a good idea from the native-born population's perspective. What's the minority unemployment rate in some cities? You're looking at 20, 30, 40, 50% for young kids in these cities. Having a whole bunch of newly legalized competitors is not necessarily such a good idea from the perspective of the native-born.
Well, what would be the problem?
Well, I mean, first and foremost is that you're looking at 7.7% official unemployment right now. Lots of people who have forsworn.
People are there already.
That's true, but right now they have a benefit in the sense that they're probably being exploited. Once you put them under the situation where they're no longer being exploited and they're legal, the competition becomes outright. And I mean, to my way of thinking, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, you've got a situation now where you're going to have a whole bunch now, let's say 11 million now legal people competing for the same level of jobs. We haven't seen the kind of growth over the course of the last 4 years that can fulfill that kind. I mean, what do we need? 1.3 or 1.5 million new jobs every single year just to fill up the natural increase in our population? That's a problem. Again, you came back to what Reagan did. Reagan, I got a kick out of it. Talk about the unions and the businesses getting into bed together. That whenever two sides like that agree on something, you know it's a really bad idea. Because when everybody agrees that something is a great idea, it's probably really rotten. And what Reagan did was to allow basically an amnesty for 3 million new illegals, I think, at the time. And the reason was, amongst others, is that the Chamber of Commerce wanted those people to be, didn't want to do anything about illegal immigration, nor did the powerful agricultural interests want to do anything about illegal immigration. Now the dispute is whether or not they're going to have a guest worker program restricted to agricultural workers, and if so, how many? Now, one thing I can guarantee, we talked a minute ago, I think you're saying about government trying to figure out where the people are going to go to fulfill an economic need. Government is the last place you want to go to try and make that determination. I mean, I'm not saying you suggested that. I'm saying that if you are expecting government to say, well, the workers can go here and not here, based upon any sort of rational basis, it ain't going to happen. So I'm not suggesting you suggested that. I'm suggesting that whenever the labor unions and the business organizations get together on something like this, it's probably a bad thing. And because they probably don't have anybody's, they're looking at their own narrow self-interests, and when those combine together, it's probably not in the public interest. I can speak to you about trend. I can tell you that the way things go is that when two sides come together and agree on something, it's almost inevitably bad for the society as a whole. When they do, in this situation, I don't want to go any further than that because I've more or less made a speech. So,
next question.
I'm Justin Robles. I'm a public relations major here at
Speak up.
My question is directed towards Mayor Bollwage. How will the proposed immigration reform bill affect the younger illegal immigrants in schools, and will there be more ESL programs offered due to this bill?
Well, we do a pretty good job of the ESL programs in the city as of now. We have them not only, we use CDBG money and others. We have Union County College, a junior college in town that works really well. We have Jersey Gardens Mall does ESL projects, so that's pretty good. But the young people, if you're between the age, and maybe the Assemblyman knows, I think if you've been here for X amount of years and you're not yet 31 years of age, you qualify for a 2-year amnesty currently under an executive order by the president that was issued a few months back. I do believe that one of the 4 points that the Assemblyman spoke about, that the young people would be able to either receive, I don't know if the word is amnesty, if that's correct, but they would be able to receive documentation to stay. I think the kids who came here between the age of 1 and 5 or 1 and 10 and really didn't have a choice, they were just following their parents and they had no idea where they were going, were just going to a new country. I think they're the ones that are going to probably make out the best in this situation.
Thank you.
To the extent that it matters politically, I agree.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you guys for coming today. I'm Brandon. I'm a junior sociology major. I just wanted to, this is kind of for everyone, is it worth noting that crime rates may increase with the influx in populations that we don't really have a great understanding about?
Crime rates?
Yes.
I think the evidence of immigration in the past, when we have had a lot of immigration over the last 30 years, is that crime rates go down actually in areas where there are more immigrants. Largely, I would say, because crime rates go down where there are more people. Like the most dangerous areas, in urban areas certainly, are usually the places where there aren't people. So I don't think there's any reason to think, and I think that immigrants may have special concern about making sure that they're not caught up in the police system because of the fear of being deported if they're undocumented, or even if they're actually legal immigrants. So I don't think there's any, I think that the correlation, the nervousness about crime and immigrants, I think is not really correctly placed. I would also say that that's not, I think that immigration reform, in my opinion, is not about having more immigrants come. And we've had a lot of immigrants over the last 20, 30 years. It's been a very exciting period. I don't think that well, I certainly wouldn't expect immigration reform to mean that there would be more immigrants coming. It would mean that you couldn't come illegally, and there would have to be appropriate legal channels for being able to come. So all the more reason, to my mind, it wouldn't have any real connection to crime.
So it's not worth anticipating at all that there might be.
As a mayor, I agree.
I would suspect it's the opposite.
Yeah.
I would agree as well, simply because, remember, if you're talking about taking undocumented people and giving them documents, that means you now have a check. The system, now, they're opaque. Yeah. Once the system has the ability to understand there's a person living at this address, they have a family that is composed of this many people, they're filing taxes, they're getting their driver's license and all of these other things, it allows the police, law enforcement, of which I was a part of, to do their job that much more effectively.
And I should say that if you talk about legal immigration, first of all, there's mostly background checks are done on anybody who wants to come here legally. I will tell you this, my sister works at the Morris County Jail. At any given time, about 1/3 to 40% of the population of that jail is illegal immigrants. My thought would be that if we have a generalized legal standard, just admitting people legally, it's unlikely we're going to get too many criminals.
You might even add one more piece, is that kind of thing, I think, is a huge drain on law enforcement today. If you didn't have to spend so much time doing the immigration enforcement, and more there are localities that are also getting caught up in what should be a federal responsibility, I think that they could maybe do more to do the normal policing and that. And I don't know if I would expect a big
we don't do any immigration enforcement. The city, we do none.
Right.
Yeah, not our job.
Any question?
Hi, my name is Danielle, and I'm a freshman in communications major. And my question was really prior to going into this, I was really thinking that this whole thing really had to do with the economy mostly, maybe because of my culture, being middle class or whatever. But it was kind of interesting how you guys brought up, and most of you seem pro-immigration to me. But I just thinking that wouldn't this hurt the economy more? Because my very little understanding of this issue is that if there's a lot of immigrants here that are undocumented, they're taking the money, and maybe a lot of them are sending it back home. So it's taking money out of our economy. Do you really think that helping, getting more immigrants documented, if this issue is going to help the economy or hurt it?
I can tell you that
that's the difference between immigration and illegal immigration. I think you're right. Everybody's in favor of immigration. Yeah. It's what do you do with people who come in outside of the system. I don't think anybody would argue against immigration.
No. But coming back to your economic point, let's assume that you send $1,000 a month to your relatives back in Ireland. Okay, what are they?
Is that where you're from?
No.
I'm just saying. It was the step dance hair. What are they going to do with it? Ultimately, if you send $1 out, it has to come back at some point, unless you want to paste those pictures of dead presidents on your wall. So international trade is almost always a wonderful thing, and they have to spend it on products. Sooner or later, it comes back to America. So again, the freer the trade, the better off we are. The economic question that you have is immigration a net benefit or a net it depends upon the immigrant. Is that if you admit someone who is, shall we say, let's just use an example, a ne'er-do-well, who is going to come into this country because we've opened our borders and we're not checking too carefully and is going to subsist off welfare, that's a problem. If you admit a physician who's going to go down the street and treat your kids, that's not a problem. So there's no one blanket statement you can make that encompasses all immigrants.
David?
So it reminds me a little bit of this, I don't know, almost none of you are probably old enough to know who Bill Rogers is. He was a comedian who, he talked about how his father told him about picking stocks and how the important thing, you have to buy a stock and hold it until it goes up and then sell it when it, after it's gone up in value. And the trick is that if it doesn't go up, don't buy it. The idea, right? So I think that to me,
tough audience.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not a very good joke teller. I guess I sort of fumble on it. Anyway, the idea is, I think, with immigrants, you don't know who's going to be a successful business owner, right? I mean, you don't know who's going to be the next person who starts Google or whatever. And I think that the focus on highly skilled immigrants is, to me, it's an important issue that ought to be discussed, but it's a little misplaced. I mean, then you're talking about people who already are well established in their careers, who must be at least in their 20s or 30s to be realistically specialized in a way that that you're talking about. That's again, that's an important issue, but it's a relatively small part of overall immigration. I think what you want is those, the people who come as kids, as young adults. That's the bulk of immigrants who come here with ambition, with the idea of starting a store, and then they go out and the fact, so like the majority of the large majority of small business owners, for example, are not people with higher degrees or not even with a college education. It's mostly immigrants, like immigrants overall. So I guess I think that's the more that we can draw in, as we always have as a country, almost always, this big, wide group of people whose main reason for coming is that they have this drive to they think something is going to happen for them in America that they can make good on.
I just want to, if we were in great economic times, this probably wouldn't even be an issue.
That was kind of my question.
Right. And, in the 80s and the 90s, when corporate America was looking to make greater profits and we were at 4% unemployment, more illegal immigration happened because corporate America was hiring more of those folks because we were at almost full employment. Now that we're at 9.7% in New Jersey, 7.7% around the country, this issue is more of a focus because of that question that you did. That's the economic issue going on now.
Probably was the same in 1913.
Right.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Indira Gova. I'm a freshman here, and I'm a PR major. So I'm going to open this question to the whole panel, and I just wanted to know, from a Republican or a Democratic standpoint, what are your thoughts on the bill? Do you think what the bipartisan group has proposed is going to be enough to fix the issue that's at hand right now, or do you think that it's going to need to be constantly reformed?
Well, first of all, there is no bill. That's one of the problems. Is that there's a generalized set of principles outstanding.
Okay, that's good.
And again, let's come back to the devil being in the. If you've ever read a federal bill, they're even worse than our New Jersey bills because they'll say, amend Section 2.345 of the Immigration Act. Section A is to delete the word "not," and unless you've got a real sense of what the laws actually do, you can't understand the law. So when you look at Obamacare, what was it, 1,000 pages, 1,500 pages long? No one had a clue what was in it. We're only learning now, and that's one of the mistakes I think that we're going to make with immigration reform is that probably what they should do is reduce it down to individual bites. I mean, it's pretty easy to understand border security. It's pretty easy to understand electronic verification of employment and what have you. Those are easy things to do. Defining tough and defining fair in a manner that's going to secure 50 or 60 votes in the United States Senate is going to be a problem.
So the point is that there is no bill yet. That's why this session is so important. You still have a chance to have some input, but it will happen quickly. We're down to the last 10 minutes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask to do 3 questions at once, and then you guys can respond to it. So please go ahead.
My name is Maddie Bressel. I'm a freshman and I'm a broadcasting major. And my question is, I know that it was stressed that once the illegal immigrants become legal and have legal documentation, that them knowing English is important and that there be proficiency tests in English. And I was wondering if that's something if you think that's something they would do, and what would the implications for our educational system be for that?
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rashi Rashwani. I'm a freshman and a broadcasting major. My question is, once and if the
Mayor, since it was directed to you, why don't you go ahead and answer?
You know what's really good about you, Anthony, is you think this panel remembers all three of those questions. So,
just the last one.
Just answer the last one.
Just the last one.
The answer is yes. I believe that historically, anyone can be assimilated into a society given the economic opportunities to create jobs. And I think it's an easy it's happened in Elizabeth. We've watched it occur over the last 50 years, from the Cuban immigration that I mentioned to the Latin American immigration. I mean, the Cubans used to be the #1 immigrant group in our city, and now there's 6, and you have Colombians, El Salvadorans, and Dominicans above it. So the answer is yes. And English as a second language is extremely important to answer that other question.
Assemblyman, any idea about the question about deported people being allowed to come back?
I haven't even, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question.
And honestly, I have not heard it at all. You know, it's you know, technically speaking, to the first question, English is supposed to be required on all citizenship tests, and you know, then that always begs the question: why are our ballots in 15 or 20 different languages? I think there should be more of an emphasis upon I guess the assimilation question comes into that as well. You know, it's one of those interesting things, I guess, you see with Iraq and such like that. The insurgents or terrorists or whoever who are shooting at us, they don't pay attention to what we look like. We're Americans to them. And it would be better, I think, if all of us regarded ourselves first and foremost as Americans. I mean, the rawest immigrant right off the boat is every bit as much of an American as I am once they accept the fact that you are an American. You believe in these certain ideals. That's what makes us different than most other countries around the world. I'm not sure that there's any one test or any one provision that can ensure that. But again, I don't know what we're going to do about people who've been kicked out before.
Yeah, I like that's a good, really good
exactly.
question.
You know, again, it comes back to the question I think that was asked before about deportations. You know, there are some groups, people that say, well, okay, the line was 1,400 people a day are being deported. There are some people who are saying, hurrah! And some people are saying, that's a tragedy. And therein lies the vast gulf of difference between why this bill is going to be such a problem. Is because a lot of people regard deportation as a wonderful thing. Get rid of the people who are here illegally. Some people regard that as a tragedy. And there's a vast gulf between them.
Well, I think, by the way, just on the deportation point, I do think the readily identifiable solution, to the extent there is one, depends upon the individual reasons why someone was deported, and then modifying the Immigration and Naturalization Act to eliminate some of the consequences that would attach to a deportation. In other words, if you're deported for various reasons, you are barred from coming to the United States again for whether it's 10, 15, 20 years. So if you have someone who was deported because they overstayed a visa versus someone who was deported because they committed a serious crime, the consequences to the former versus the latter should be very different. And they should be even more different if a single person from a family member was deported and the remaining family members are here. So then you've got one person outside of the country barred for 10 to 15 years. So I actually do think there are the question is very important, but I do think there are lots of bipartisan aspects of a solution that could be crafted to allow reasonable reunification of families and elimination of some of the bars that would attach when you're subject to deportation proceedings, removal proceedings. Anyway, just my 2 cents.
And just one note on English proficiency. When my wife's grandmother went for her citizenship, one of the questions was, who was the first president of the United States? And she said, in her broken English, George Washington British. Thank you. She was made a citizen. She did. She passed. Next group of questions.
Hi, my name is Aristotle Diaz, and I'm a freshman and a public relations major. And my question is, if a bill is passed, what kind of impact do you think it will have on Social Security?
My name is Ryan. I am a freshman communications major, and my question, or 2 questions really, is directed towards Mr. Carroll. In the concern of Republicans, basically, a lot of people have been saying that even if the bill gets passed, the immigrants would slightly favor Democrats because most of the policies that are currently enacted favor immigrants. And even concerning the Latino vote, even in the last election, the Republicans did not do well in that demographic. So with even more Latinos and immigrants coming to the country, how do you think Republicans would fare in the future?
So political impact of immigration reform. Good.
My name is Maya Butler. I'm a communications major. My question is, what would be Plan B if immigrants couldn't pay the cost of becoming a citizen? Would they automatically be deported, or would there be be another option for them.
I'm not sure. Do you understand the last question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, in answer to the last question, who has a clue? Again,
Well, so I think
without having the bill.
we have some clues. I think that the I mean those are some of the those are some of the details that are being worked out. I think that the cost is one of a number of factors people that have been in debate about how easy do you, I mean I think there are two stages. What does it take to get legal status, and what does it take to become a citizen? And I think so there are a number of issues about how long it's going to be delayed, how much it'll cost, what obstacles you put in front of citizenship. I think the legal status has to be pretty easy, and in fact, it has to be pretty universal, in my opinion. Because I mean, the problem is, I mean, so the Assemblyman was saying, I think, sure, maybe there's some people who like seeing a lot of people being deported today, and some people who think that it's a tragedy that they're being deported. But I think everybody agrees that no matter how many people you deport in any kind of realistic scenario, you're not going to deport anywhere near everybody. There's no way to deport 11 million people from a country of 300 million. It's just not viable. So you have a system that's inherently broken, and I think that in order to make it fixed, you have to figure out how do you get the 11 million people and essentially give them some kind of legal status. So I think that's kind of plan B, I guess. I mean, I hope that I think it's a bad idea. The person before was asking, I think it's a bad idea to create two statuses and have a large number of people feel like they're in some kind of second-class status. But I think that would be the plan B, is you'd have legal status but not citizenship.
Well, actually, if I could, the way the Immigration and Naturalization Act generally is set up today, if you can't afford a benefit to which you are legally entitled to, generally speaking, when we're talking about costs, I'm talking about the costs of going through the process, right? So the way I understood your question is, let's say it costs the United States government, I don't know, $1,000 to process something. You've got to fill out your, this form, then you've got to go through your hearing and all the rest, and someone couldn't afford to pay their fees for that. Generally speaking, whether it's applying for a green card or applying for a family reunification petition, or whatever the form is, you file what's called a fee waiver form. And those fee waiver forms are designed to ensure that there is not a second class, a two-tiered system, where if you're struggling to pay your bills and you don't have entitlements to sit there and actually pay whatever the fees are, you literally submit to DHS, to USCIS, your paycheck, and there's a humanitarian decision that's made, and it's a waiver, and they grant you the benefit. And I think that's the reality of how this would work.
The fees are one thing. I think they're talking about in the bill.
That was a question.
I know, but the bills are talking about. I think what maybe I'm misstating your question, but they're also talking about back taxes, fees, and not just fees.
That's a different.
Back taxes, penalties, and such like that, which could be substantial.
Well, there are criminal penalties that attach to failure to pay taxes.
I understand that, but apparently there's going to be an amnesty for that as well. If you haven't paid your back taxes, they'll make you pay your back taxes, pay a fine, and then you can get in line. And that could be a substantial cost. So I understand where she's going with that. It's a very good point.
Sure.
As respects Social Security, that depends upon whether we get a whole bunch of young people or a whole bunch of old people. Right now, Social Security is about $21 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities. The program is going to go kind of broke just about the time when I want to retire. Wonderful. You guys are going to get stuck with the bill. Importing a whole bunch of kids who are going to pay in for 40 or 50 years is a good idea from the Social Security perspective. Importing of people who are 40, 50, 60 years old and who are going to hit on that at some point in the near future, that's a bad idea. So it would depend upon the immigrant mix as to the demographic. Now, as respects to the political consequences, from my perspective, who cares? I mean, I don't like the idea of judging on the basis of how things are going to work out politically. I may be alone in that, but that's yes, the Republicans didn't do as well amongst Hispanics as they might. But if you look at the demographics of that, Obama won Hispanics who make under $50,000 overwhelmingly. He won Hispanics who make more than $50,000 a lot less overwhelmingly. And so Republicans tend to prosper when people are no longer looking at the government as their source of income. My guess would be that a generation down the line, we should do just fine.
Mayor, did you?
Yeah. The politics, I love that question because I frankly I agree with the Assemblyman that it's not going to matter because there's generational shifts. I mean, the Democrats were totally in control of the southern part of this country up until civil rights legislation was passed. And even Lyndon Johnson at the time said, we've just given away the South for a generation to come. And if you look at the elected officials in the South now, you can see that it's changed drastically. So I agree that it's going to change. But currently, I think what happens in because they play politics at a way different level than the rest of us. I mean, way different. And you got the Republican Party who, if you listen to the pundits, think that they're coming late to the immigration debate and that they need to do something quickly in order to gather steam or get more Hispanic votes. And then you look at the Democrats, who are clearly in control based on the numbers that the Assemblyman just talked about. But so then you look at the politics. So will the Republicans really want to pass legislation in order to get a foothold into the Hispanic community? And then the key is, do the Democrats want it passed? The Democrats, in my opinion, are going to wind up putting poison pills or possible amendments on this legislation that will force the Republicans to vote against it. And then the Democrats, going into the midterm elections, can keep beating up on the Republicans and say they didn't pass anything. And that could be a strategy. And we really don't know because, like I say, they play it at a different level.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll take the last group. Mayor, I'll keep track of the questions because there are 4 this time, so don't worry.
Okay, you'll keep track of me?
I'll keep track.
You're a reporter, you could do that.
Hello, I'm Lauren Lindenwood. I'm a junior and a public relations student. My question is, what do you think the agreement that was posted on the internet about what they want to stipulate in some of how to become a citizen? And one was about to be functionally literate in English. My question was, how do you think they're going to test this skill, as English has been described to be one of the hardest languages to acquire, a full understanding?
Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a first-year grad student in communications. I also work full-time in the healthcare industry, and this is kind of where my question is coming from. I work in a couple of hospitals that have a lot of illegal immigrants that go there, and my curiosity is, how does the illegal immigrants affect healthcare in this country, since they don't have healthcare insurance? Is that bringing down the hospitals they're going to, and particularly in areas like Newark or Elizabeth, where there's a lot of immigrants there, or down in Lakewood, where I work? How is that going? How is healthcare affected? Because obviously that's another huge hot topic as of late.
My name is Elliot. I'm a first-year grad student in the communications program, and my question is to Congressman Carroll.
From your mouth to God's ear. I like that idea. You keep talking like that. That's good.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about a statement you made earlier about how having more legal immigrants could cause competition amongst native-born immigrants. But I don't really feel that statement is correct, and I wanted to ask you, I guess, how many inner-city immigrant kids do you know that are skilled landscapers and plumbers
if I propose that we give Assemblyman Carroll the last word to respond to the question, and then we'll handle the other three. About healthcare?
I'll jump in on the
Well,
healthcare.
let him do that one. Okay.
Charity care is a big issue in this state. As you know, you work in the healthcare industry, and it's constantly getting less and less dollars from state government to the hospitals or federal government to the hospitals because of the budget situations that go on. I mean, nobody has money, and yet if you walk into a hospital, you have to get service. So charity care is an issue, and it's an issue not only for the immigrant community, it's an issue for the community that lives in, whether you live in urban areas or suburban areas, charity care is an issue. And, you know, the health care bill may address it, but not immediately. That's going to take time for the health care bill to address getting more people health insurance. That may happen, it may not, depending on who you believe in the political spectrum. I'm not convinced one way or another, but there is a road to address it. But in the short term, the problem is charity care funding, and as you know, if you're in the hospital, it's going to continue to be a problem.
About the question of specialized visas crowding out other legal immigrants. David or Eric?
I think the question, and again, just to clarify to make sure I understand, the way I understood it was to say, listen, I've come to this country legally. I therefore shouldn't be penalized because people who will become naturalized through this other process and has arrived here illegally will be getting a benefit that I'm not getting, and that's not fair. And I deal with the quota system a lot with my Iraqi clients and others, because if I can't get them out through one way, I'll have to file a family reunification petition, and earlier sort of underlined in my notes was a big statement, quotas, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, because you're right, depending upon where you're from geographically, you know, the quota system is set so that there's a 10 to 15 year waiting period for people from different parts of the world to get a benefit which they would otherwise be entitled to immediately. From my perspective, I don't know what the answer to that is, simply to say that it probably needs to be included in the overall debate. How one addresses that, there are obviously existing avenues. It makes it difficult because of the quotas in other systems. For example, when you're a graduate student here, you're gaining specialized skill sets, so in theory you can apply for an H-1B, and then depending upon your residency here, you can naturalize that way, but it's certainly going to take a lot longer of a time to do so. But I'd be curious to hear your sort of views on that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
David, anything on that or on the functional literacy test?
Well, I think, yeah, the test, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I think English is the hardest language to learn, but Chinese is hard, sure. But you know, I think those are, I mean, these are the level of details that I think is hard for us to answer right now because it's what's being discussed. I mean, my feeling is that, you know, in terms of the higher skilled visas, I'm, you know, quite impressed with how America has done with the mix of immigrants that we've gotten, which has been a very diverse mix that's been contributing, I think, enormously to the economy, that people come when there have been jobs, don't come as much when there haven't been jobs. You know, I think, I'm sorry, why I was sort of not, or shaking my head before, they go where there are jobs, they don't go where there aren't jobs, right? So you do not see a lot of immigrants in places like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. You do see them coming to places where there's been economic growth. And in fact, I think you see in a lot of the places, in fact, Baltimore is doing this right now, and Detroit, trying to do what they're doing with what's happened in Elizabeth, I guess more or less naturally, right? That when you have immigrants coming into, there's nothing worse for a city than having a declining population. Like that gives you a tax base that becomes unsustainable, basically. And I think that where there's been immigration, that's been very good for the economy. So I'm sort of less, it's become very voguish to talk about high-skilled immigrants and how that's going to be better or how maybe that's going to be a problem. But my feeling is we've done pretty well with that. I think what you do need to do is pay some attention to when there's overall demand and when there isn't. And I think that you do want, you know, at least, I don't think economics should rule everything, and yet it's obviously going to be important. So, you know, certainly, you know, refugees, the kind of visas you're talking about, I think also family unification. There are a number of factors besides just economics, but it seems to me totally reasonable and appropriate to think about the economic issues. And there it seems like, you know, you want more immigrants when there's a shortage, and you don't want as many when there's not. And that is kind of the natural trend anyway.
Just one last quick. There actually is a functional equivalency to English already embedded in the system. I just was actually at a naturalization hearing followed by the ceremony. a week later. The hearing was 2 weeks ago, and what they make you do when you sit in a room with a DHS officer, he gives you a sentence, and you have to write the sentence in English, and then he asks you to write your name. So I think within the existing framework, a lot of the questions that people raise today, it will be pigeonholed or included or piggybacked onto. That was just a minor addendum.
Someone, last word.
Okay, well, the question was about competition for low-wage jobs. Architecture and plumbing are both licensed professions virtually everywhere, so my guess is there are very few illegal aliens practicing either one of those professions. I'll just give you a little anecdote that after Sandy hit, my son, who is not a skilled landscaper, was handed a shovel and a rake and told, go for it. And he did it. It's not really that kind of hardcore training required to be a landscaper. Same thing with tree work or what have you. They're semi-skilled jobs which certainly could be easily filled by people if they're willing to work hard. If you create a situation where you've got 11 million new competitors for the same kind of relatively low-skilled, low-wage jobs, that's a problem. And it's basic economics. I mean, the demand versus the supply. If the demand, let's talk about minimum wage, for example. If you live in an area where there's a shortage of unskilled labor, the minimum wage is an irrelevance. You're getting paid more than that. If you live in an area where there are a lot of people seeking those few jobs, then it becomes an issue. So from my perspective, I look at it simply as saying that if you are a native-born, relatively unskilled individual, maybe you don't want to go to college, maybe you want to work in landscaping, as you said, if you've got a lot of low-wage competition out there, that is a problem for you. And at least heretofore, most of the immigration that we've seen illegally has been for that low-wage, low-skilled sector.
Okay. If that satisfies you, at least for the moment.
But whether it satisfies them or not, that's my answer.
That's right, and you're sticking with it. Mayor Bollwage, Mr. Kallick, Mr. Blinderman, and Assemblyman Carroll, thank you very much for illuminating